On the final morning of his life, a condemned man made one last request: to see the dog who had once been his only family. But the moment Rusty's leash was loosened, he didn't run to his owner. He bolted straight toward a uniformed officer near the gate. In those frozen seconds, the entire prison fell silent. No one imagined the truth buried for 8 long years would be dragged into the light by an old dog's instinct. The morning at Redstone State Penitentiary started like any other, with the slow rattle of keys and the distant slam of steel doors, but the air felt heavier, as if the concrete itself was listening. Light leaked in through narrow windows, cutting pale stripes across the death row corridor, dust drifting lazily through the beams like it had nowhere else to go. Logan Price sat on the edge of his bunk, elbows on his knees, hands loosely clasped as if he'd forgotten how to hold anything tighter. 8 years inside had carved the angles from his face, leaving him lean and tired rather than dangerous. He stared at the scuffed floor, but his mind wasn't there. It was in a small, greasy garage on the edge of town, where a red-brown dog once slept under a workbench. Down the hall, Officer Morales walked with the warden, their footsteps echoing against cinderblock. Morales had the slow, solid walk of a man who'd seen too many endings. Warden Harold Green moved like someone carrying a weight no one could see. His suit pressed, tie straight, eyes already tired, despite the early hour. In his hand was a thin manila folder with Logan Price stamped across the top in fading ink. They stopped outside Logan's cell. For a moment, neither spoke. Through the bars, Logan lifted his head, eyes calm in a way that unsettled Morales more than fear or anger ever could. The warden cleared his throat, formal out of habit. "Mr. Price," he said, "State has scheduled your time. You understand that." Logan nodded once, like they were confirming the weather instead of his death. "We need to ask about your last request," Green continued. "Meal, call, spiritual advisor?" The words sounded rehearsed, worn down by repetition over the years. Morales watched Logan's hands, expecting a tremor, a clenched jaw, a plea for one more chance. Instead, the man on the bunk just blinked slowly, like he'd already had this conversation alone in his head 100 times. Quiet stretched between them, thick and awkward. Somewhere deeper in the prison, a door slammed and a voice shouted, then faded. Logan wet his lips, eyes drifting toward the tiny window where a strip of sky showed a washed-out blue. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and steady, the way a person talks when they've run out of time for pretending. "I want to see my dog," he said. "Just once more. I want Rusty." Morales felt something hitch in his chest at the name. He remembered the intake photo from years ago. A younger Logan in oil-stained coveralls, arm thrown around a red-brown shepherd mix with bright, stubborn eyes. The dog had stared straight into the camera like it understood what was happening. The note under the picture had been short and cold. "Animal seized." Morales had watched Rusty hauled away in a crate, barking until the van turned the corner. The request hung in the air, strange and fragile. Most men asked for steak, ice cream, junk food they hadn't tasted since childhood. Some wanted whiskey they weren't allowed to have, or a call to someone who stopped answering years before. No one asked for a dog. Warden Green shifted his weight, the file creaking softly in his grip. "You don't want a phone call? A letter? There's no one else?" he asked. Logan shook his head. "There's no one else left," he said, not bitter, just stating a fact. "Rusty's the only one who knew me before the cops, before the trial, before everything went wrong." He exhaled, slow. He never looked at me like a headline. He just sat there, waiting for me to come home. His gaze met the warden's, and for the first time, something like urgency flickered in his eyes. I just want to know he didn't forget. Later, in the small conference room off the control center, the file lay open on the table between Green and Morales. Rookie officer Tyler Harris leaned against the wall, trying to look like he belonged in the conversation. The old intake photo of Logan and Rusty sat on top of a stack of reports, the dog's darker muzzle and alert ears almost glowing under the harsh fluorescent lights. "He's really asking for a dog?" Harris murmured. "Rusty?" Morales corrected quietly. "Name's Rusty." He ran a thumb along the margin of the page that listed the dog's fate. The line was almost an afterthought. Animal transferred, then a partially smudged note about being rehomed with a local officer. No follow-up, no detail. Just a dog ripped from one life and dropped into another. Green stared at the line for a long time, jaw tight, like the paperwork itself offended him. "It's a security risk," Harris said, a little too quickly, desperate to sound professional. "We've never brought an animal into the death yard. Guy's still a condemned inmate. What if the dog freaks out? What if he tries something?" Morales gave him a look that shut him up mid-sentence. "Logan's been clean 8 years," Morales said. "No fights, no contraband, no attempts to run. If he wanted trouble, he had plenty of chances." Green leaned back in his chair, the old wood creaking under his weight. Through the glass window, he could see the gray courtyard, the high fences, the razor wire catching pale light. Somewhere out there, if the records were right, Rusty was alive, breathing the same dry desert air, carrying memories no one had bothered to ask about. "This is his last day," the warden said softly. "He's not asking us for mercy. Just 10 minutes with something that once meant home." Silence settled again, but it felt different this time, edged with something almost human. Green finally closed the folder with a soft snap. "Find the dog," he said. "Under strict supervision, yard only, 10 minutes. If Rusty is still breathing, we let the man see him." Morales nodded, a hint of relief easing the lines on his face. As they stepped out, none of them knew that those 10 minutes wouldn't just change Logan's last day. They would drag a buried truth back into the light, carried in the memory of a dog who refused to forget. In the control room above the cell blocks, the hum of monitors and radios filled the space like background static. Warden Green set Logan's file on the long metal table, the manila edges soft from years of being handled and ignored. The fluorescent lights made every page look the same shade of tired gray, no matter what kind of life was stamped inside. Officer Morales flipped the folder open, smoothing the dog-eared corners with calloused fingers. The intake photo sat on top, a younger Logan in stained coveralls, one arm thrown around a red-brown shepherd mix with sharp, curious eyes. The dog's ears were high, his mouth slightly open, as if caught mid-breath, mid-bark, mid-life. Below the photo, a line of small print waited where most eyes never lingered. Animal seized, transferred. There was a half-smudged notation about being rehomed with a local officer, name partially blurred by time and ink. No one had bothered to wonder what happened to that dog after the paperwork was filed away. Tyler Harris leaned in, squinting at the page, the rookie's face still too young for the place he worked. "So we just find him?" he asked. "Like a lost package?" Morales gave him a flat look, then tapped the photo with 2 fingers. "That's not a package," he said quietly. "That's Rusty. And he remembers more than half the people in this building." Half an hour later and 20 miles away, a black and white county cruiser rolled along a 2-lane desert road, heat already shimmering off the asphalt. Deputy Emma Clark drove with one hand relaxed on the wheel, the other resting near the center console. In the back seat, behind the mesh divider, Rusty lay on a worn gray blanket, head on his paws, eyes half closed, but not asleep. Rusty's muzzle had more silver than red now, like someone had dusted him with ash. A faint scar ran along his shoulder, a souvenir from a night when a routine call turned into gunfire in a grocery parking lot. That night he had lunged without thinking, pulling Emma out of the line of fire, taking the impact in muscle and fur. After that, no one called him just a shelter dog again. Emma caught his gaze in the rearview mirror and gave a small smile. "You doing okay back there, partner?" she asked. Rusty's ears twitched at her voice. He didn't wag, but his eyes softened, that quiet, steady look of a dog who had seen more than he needed to and stayed anyway. The cruiser smelled faintly of dust, coffee, and wet fur from old rainy days. The call from dispatch had come in clipped and official. Special transfer request from Redstone, 1K9 formerly registered to inmate Logan Price. Emma had frozen for a heartbeat at the name, memory flashing to a grainy news broadcast years ago about a murder in a corner store and a mechanic led away in cuffs. Back then, she hadn't questioned much. The world said guilty, and she'd been too busy surviving her own shifts. But when the dispatcher repeated the name Logan Price, something shifted in the back seat. Rusty lifted his head slowly, as if pulled up by a rope only he could feel. His ears pricked forward, and a low, uncertain sound leaked from his throat, not quite a whine, not quite a growl. Emma had glanced back, surprised. Rusty rarely reacted to names on the radio. Now, as they neared the prison, the landscape flattened into scrub and rock, fences and towers rising on the horizon like a hard line between worlds. Rusty pushed himself up, moving stiffly but with purpose, paws braced against the rubber floor mat. His nose worked the air, catching scents Emma couldn't name. Steel, oil, old concrete baked in the sun, and something underneath that tugged at a memory buried 8 years deep. Emma rolled down her window a crack, letting dry wind whirl through the car. "You know where we're going, don't you?" she murmured. Rusty didn't answer, of course, but his tail gave one slow, uncertain sweep. His gaze stayed fixed ahead, body leaning just slightly toward the glass as if the whole car might break loose and let him run. At the outer gate, the cruiser stopped, and officers approached, checking IDs, peering into the back seat. When one of them glanced at Rusty, the dog met his eyes calmly, then looked away, uninterested. He wasn't here for strangers and keys and gates. His attention kept drifting upward toward the coils of razor wire that glittered under the sun like a distant, dangerous river. Somewhere behind those walls was a scent he knew by heart. As the gates groaned open and the cruiser eased forward, Emma felt a quiet weight settle in her chest. She'd brought witnesses to court, suspects to holding cells, even fellow deputies to disciplinary hearings. This was the first time she'd driven a dog toward a man scheduled to die. In the rearview mirror, Rusty watched the prison swallow them whole, eyes steady, as if he understood this was no ordinary visit. The small yard behind the death row wing looked more like a forgotten concrete box than a place meant for goodbyes. The sky sat high and pale above the razor wire, too bright for how heavy the morning felt. A single metal chair waited in the middle, its shadow stretching thin across the cracked ground as if it wanted to leave but had nowhere to go. Officer Morales walked beside Logan as they stepped through the door leading out from the corridor. Logan's wrists were cuffed in front of him, the chain loose, not tight, a small kindness in a place built on control. He squinted against the sudden light, his eyes tracing the fence, the tower, the lonely chair, as if trying to understand how all of life could be reduced to this small square of sky. Up on a narrow concrete balcony, Warden Green stood with Assistant DA Olivia Reed and Rookie Tyler Harris. Olivia held a slim notebook, her expression practiced and calm, but her eyes missed nothing. Harris gripped the railing a little too hard, knuckles pale, feeling the strange weight of watching a man spend his last unscheduled minutes. Beneath them, the yard felt like a stage no one wanted to stand on. Father Ben, the prison chaplain, waited near the door, hands clasped loosely over his Bible. He was in his late 60s, shoulders a little stooped, face etched with the kind of lines that come from listening more than speaking. He offered Logan a small nod, an unspoken, "I'm here if you want me," and stepped back, letting the man walk to the chair on his own. Logan did not sit right away. He moved a few steps past the chair, closer to the far gate where the outer drive met the yard. There he stopped, as if he could already feel something on the other side of the steel and chain link, some thread pulling tight from an old life into this last hour. Morales took his place a few feet away, hands resting on his duty belt, eyes quietly on the man he'd watched for 8 years. On the far side of the perimeter fence, a guard at the vehicle gate raised his hand, signaling the arrival of a car. The distant rumble of an engine drifted across the open space, low and steady, and the yard seemed to listen. Logan tilted his head, hearing it too. The sound was nothing special, just another engine in a world full of them, but his chest tightened as if it carried every unanswered question he had left. The cruiser rolled into view, moving slowly past layers of fence and barbed wire. Rusty's nose was already pressed to the back window, a darker shape behind the glass, breath fogging a small circle. When the car stopped and Emma stepped out, Rusty shifted, his paws thumping once against the door before she opened it and clipped on his leash. His body was older now, but the pull in him was young. As Emma led Rusty toward the inner gate, the dog's world narrowed to scent and sound. He could smell hot metal, oil, disinfectant, and fear baked into the concrete, but beneath it all was something faint and familiar, the ghost of grease and sweat and sun-warmed flannel. His ears twitched at the clack of locks and the grind of gate motors, each barrier opening like a curtain between him and something he had once called home. The last gate clanged shut behind them, sealing Emma and Rusty inside the yard. For a moment, everything seemed to hold its breath. Rusty stopped, eyes sweeping the space, tail low but moving. Then his gaze caught on a figure, near the metal chair, standing still in the open, shoulders a little slumped, face older but carved from a memory that had never fully faded. The leash in Emma's hand went taut. Logan felt his throat close as soon as he saw the dog. Rusty's coat was more muted now, the red deepened into rust and gray, but the shape of him, the set of his ears, the way he leaned into the air as if sniffing out courage. It was all the same. For a second, Logan was back in his garage, the smell of motor oil and coffee around him, Rusty sleeping under the workbench until a hand on a toolbox made him look up. Morales glanced at the warden. Green gave a single, measured nod. Emma loosened her grip. The leash slipped from her fingers like a rope dropped into water, and Rusty surged forward. The old stiffness in his joints vanished beneath a rush of recognition. His paws hit the concrete in quick, uneven beats, nails scraping, ears flying back, the kind of run that belongs to a heart moving faster than a body can keep up. Logan dropped to his knees before Rusty reached him, the cuffs clinking softly as he lowered himself. Rusty slammed into his chest with a force that knocked the breath from him, front paws on his shoulders, nose pressed into the hollow of his neck. A rough, broken whine spilled out of the dog, part joy, part grief, like all the long years without his person had finally found a voice. For a moment, the prison fell away. There were no guns, no watchtowers, no ticking clock on a state schedule. There was only the feel of thick fur under Logan's hands, the familiar weight against his body, the smell of dog and dust, and something that still, against all odds, felt like home. Rusty's tail battered his back, those old muscles fighting to keep up with all the feelings that had been waiting in silence for 8 long years. Up on the balcony, Olivia looked away just long enough to swallow hard, the scene below cutting through her practiced courtroom distance. Harris stared openly, his idea of inmates rewritten in an instant by the sight of a condemned man clinging to a dog like he was the last living piece of himself. Even Warden Green's face softened, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening with something that wasn't quite regret, but close. Father Ben stepped a little closer to the yard, not wanting to intrude, but unable to stay far. He'd seen men curse, pray, laugh, and go silent on their last day. He'd seen anger and denial and empty stares. This, one man holding his dog as if the world might vanish if he let go, felt quieter and somehow louder than all of that. He bowed his head for a moment, not in ritual, but in simple respect. As Rusty's breathing slowly steadied, his body relaxed slightly, his paws slipping down to rest against Logan's chest. He pulled back just enough to look at the man's face, nose twitching, eyes searching. There were more lines now, more gray, more tired in the eyes. But beneath it, Rusty found the same scent, the same heartbeat he'd once curled beside on worn couch cushions after long days at the shop. The dog gave one soft huff as if to say, "I remember." Logan managed a rough laugh that broke halfway into a sob. He pressed his forehead to Rusty's and closed his eyes, letting everything else blur. For the first time in 8 years, the echo of boots and keys and clanging doors faded into the background. It was just the two of them again, like it had been before cops and headlines and accusations. The world, for a handful of heartbeats, felt mercifully small. The yard stayed quiet, the moment stretching, then settling into something softer. Only after a long time did Logan loosen his grip, his hand still resting in Rusty's fur, as if afraid that looking away for too long might make the dog disappear. Rusty stayed close, leaning his weight into him, not in a rush anymore. Whatever time they had, he would fill it the way dogs always did, completely, without questions, one steady breath at a time. For a while, Rusty stayed pressed against Logan's chest, his breathing slowing to a steady rhythm, the wild edge of reunion smoothing into something calmer. His paws rested lightly on Logan's knees now, nails clicking softly when he shifted. The man's fingers moved through his fur in slow, absent circles, the way they had on quiet nights when the only sound was a TV murmuring in the corner. The sounds of the prison began to creep back in around them. A radio crackled on someone's shoulder. Metal groaned softly as a guard shifted his weight along the fence. Up on the balcony, Tyler Harris exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, and Olivia Reed wrote something small in her notebook, though her eyes stayed on the yard more than the page. Life, with all its rough edges, slipped in around the fragile bubble they'd made. Rusty's ears flicked once, then twice, tuning to something beyond the simple comfort of Logan's touch. A door somewhere behind the yard opened with a hollow clang, different from the ones before. The sound bounced off concrete, slightly sharper, carrying a rhythm Rusty recognized from another life. Heavy steps, steady pace, gear clinking in a way that meant uniform, authority, and danger all braided together. Logan felt the change before he understood it. Rusty's weight shifted, muscles tightening under his hands. The dog's chest expanded on a deeper breath, then held. His tail, which had been thumping against Logan's side, slowed and stopped, hanging still. Logan pulled back just enough to see Rusty's face, and what he saw there stole the bitter little bit of peace he'd managed to find. Rusty was no longer looking at him. His eyes had locked onto something over Logan's shoulder, pupils narrowing, ears standing sharp as antennas. A low vibration started deep in his chest, so soft at first it barely seemed like sound, more like the rumble of distant thunder you feel in your bones before you hear it. Logan recognized that sound. Rusty had used it for trespassers in the yard, strangers at the shop, men whose energy felt wrong. Morales noticed it too. He straightened a little, eyes following Rusty's line of sight. Through the open door at the far side of the yard, Sergeant Cole Jennings had stepped in, clipboard under one arm, the other hand resting casually near his holster. He'd been called down from transport detail just in case. Anything with the last-minute visit went sideways. To him, it was another box to check off on a long, numb checklist. Cole's boots clicked against the concrete as he crossed the threshold, the sound clean and sharp in the thin morning air. He scanned the yard with the detached eye of a man used to measuring risk, not emotion. His gaze flicked past Logan and Rusty, registering them the way you register weather. Present, but not personal. If he noticed the dog's sudden stillness, he didn't show it. Rusty's growl rose a notch, still low, but no longer just a warning to himself. His lips peeled back a fraction, exposing the edge of his teeth. Emma's hand tightened on the loose end of the leash, surprise prickling along her spine. This wasn't the Rusty who greeted neighbors' kids or curled up on her couch. This was the Rusty she had seen only a few times on duty, when something in the dark told him they were not alone. "Easy, boy," Logan whispered, one hand sliding to Rusty's shoulder. There was no command in his voice, just concern. He could feel the tremor running through the dog, a coiled readiness that had nothing to do with age. Rusty flicked his eyes up at him for half a heartbeat, as if to say, "I hear you," then returned his stare to Cole, the growl never fully leaving his chest. Up on the balcony, Tyler leaned forward. "What's got into the dog?" he murmured. Olivia didn't answer. She watched Rusty's focus, the way every part of his body aimed toward one man, not in confusion or fear, but in recognition. Warden Green followed their gaze, his brow creasing as he looked from Rusty to Cole and back again, like he'd stumbled onto a conversation he didn't understand. Cole slowed a fraction as he felt all the eyes on him. His jaw tightened just a little, but his stride did not fully break. He lifted his chin, annoyance flickering across his features. "Is this really necessary?" he called out, half to the warden, half to the yard in general. "We're babysitting a dog now?" The joke landed flat, absorbed by concrete and tension. Rusty's growl deepened. The air in the yard thickened. Emma could feel her heartbeat in her fingertips where they clenched the leash. Morales shifted his stance, one hand drifting closer to his sidearm out of habit. Not because he thought the dog was the danger, but because something in Rusty's reaction told him this moment was not normal. Logan stared at Cole, searching his face, his memory, trying to place why. His dog would react like this to a man he didn't recognize. "Rusty," Emma said softly, trying to slide calm into her voice. "It's okay. Heel." It was a word he usually obeyed without question. Rusty's ears twitched at her tone, but his body stayed locked on Cole. His tail was stiff now, not tucked, not wagging, just a straight line of tension. He took a single step forward, claws scraping on the concrete, pulling against the slack of the leash. For one strange, stretched-out second, everything balanced on a knife edge. A dog with his past standing in front of a man who wanted to leave his buried, a condemned prisoner caught between them, and a yard full of people who did not yet know their lives had just shifted. Then Tyler, nervous and meaning well, moved closer to Emma to help, reaching for the leash she held. The small bump of bodies, the tug at Rusty's collar, snapped whatever thin thread of patience the dog had left. Rusty lunged. The leash slid through Emma's fingers faster than she could clamp down, the nylon burning her palm. He shot forward, muscles firing with a force no one expected, from an aging dog, paws pounding against the concrete. For an instant, Logan thought Rusty was coming back to him, a second desperate embrace. But the dog ran right past where his owner knelt, eyes locked on one target, leaving a stunned man reaching out to empty air. Rusty's paws hammered the concrete, each stride eating up the space between him and Cole. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The yard seemed to shrink around that line of motion, a straight path cut through still air. Logan half rose from his knees, one hand reaching out, fingers closing on nothing but the echo of the dog that had just passed him. Rusty slid to a halt a few feet from Cole, claws scraping, body low but solid. He planted himself there, chest heaving, ears pinned forward, eyes burning up at the taller man. Then the sound came, tearing out of him in sharp, furious bursts, a bark that wasn't greeting or play, but accusation. Each one bounced off the walls and came back harder. Cole flinched on the first bark, just enough for anyone really watching to see it. His hand dipped instinctively toward his sidearm, then stopped halfway, fingers curling into a fist instead. The clipboard under his arm tilted, edges digging into his ribs. For the first time that morning, his calm, bored mask slipped, and something tight and wary showed beneath. Emma ran forward, hand grabbing for the trailing leash, breath catching in her throat. "Rusty! Back!" she called, the command crisp from years of training. Rusty heard her. His ear flicked at the sound of her voice. But he did not back up. He held his ground, weight balanced, ready to spring if the man in front of him took one wrong step. The growl under his barking rolled like a storm that refused to move on. Morales came up on Rusty's flank, one palm lifted in a steadying gesture toward Cole. "Nobody move," he said, quietly, to both man and dog. Up on the balcony, Tyler pressed against the rail, eyes wide, while Olivia watched with narrowed focus, tracking every twitch in Cole's jaw, every inch Rusty refused to yield. Warden Green's hand wrapped around the rail until his knuckles bleached white. Logan watched it all from a few yards away, his heartbeat thudding against the inside of his chest like it wanted out. He knew that stance, that sound, the way Rusty's body had gone from soft to iron. He had seen it once before, the night a stranger lingered too long outside the garage, eyes roaming over tools that weren't his. Rusty had planted himself between the man and the open door then, too, growl saying what Logan was too polite to. Father Ben edged closer to Morales, his old shoes whispering on the concrete. He did not pretend to understand police work or K-9 training, but years of watching people die had taught him to feel when something more than fear was moving through a room. The way that dog looked at Cole, it wasn't confusion or fright. It was recognition and a judgment older than any court. Rusty drew in a long breath, nose working, catching scents no one else could. Sweat, gun oil, the faint trace of a cheap cologne. Underneath it, a thread of something burned and dirty, like old cordite and spilled liquor in a small store with humming refrigerators. Memory is different for dogs. It lives in their bodies. As he stared at Cole, a picture his nose knew very well rose up from 8 years ago, and his growl deepened. "Get that animal under control," Cole snapped, voice cracking just enough to betray him. He tried to take a step back, but his heel bumped the threshold of the door, stopping him. For a man used to owning every room he walked into, being pinned by a dog's eyes felt wrong, unnatural. Rusty answered his shout with another bark, louder, as if he were calling the attention of the whole world to this one man. Emma finally caught the leash, wrapping the nylon tight around her fist, shoulders straining. Rusty resisted, muscles bunching, front paws digging furrows in the concrete. He didn't lunge again, but he refused to turn away, his body angling so that even as Emma pulled him back a step, his line of sight never left Cole. That unwavering focus made more than one guard shift on his feet. Olivia stepped closer to the balcony rail, her voice calm but carrying. "Sergeant Jennings," she called down, "you said you were never inside Mr. Price's old neighborhood the night of the murder, correct?" Cole's eyes flicked up at her, then back to the dog. "I said I was on the perimeter," he answered, "like I've always said." Rusty's growl rolled again, long and low. It sounded to everyone listening like disagreement. Warden Green made a decision then, the kind that changes the course of days without anyone fully realizing it yet. "That's enough for out here," he said, the authority in his voice cutting through the tension. "Morales, take Mr. Price and the dog to interview room 3. Emma, you stay with them. Jennings, you report there in 15 minutes. We're going to clear this up." No one argued. The yard exhaled all at once. As Morales guided Logan toward the door, Rusty allowed Emma to lead him, but kept looking over his shoulder. Every few steps he glanced back at Cole, eyes narrowed, as if memorizing the shape of the man all over again. Cole watched them go, adjusting his grip on the clipboard, jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked in his cheek. However this started, it was no longer just a simple goodbye in a prison yard. Inside the corridor, the echo of their footsteps followed them down the cinder-block hall. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and uncaring. Rusty walked close to Logan's side now, shoulder brushing his leg with every stride, but his ears stayed pricked toward the front, listening for the next door, the next voice, the next shift in the air. Emma glanced down at him, unease pooling in her stomach. "You really think he remembers that man?" she asked softly, more to Morales than to Logan. Morales didn't answer right away. He looked at Rusty, at the calm but watchful way the dog moved, and thought of every inmate he'd seen come and go. "I think dogs remember things we work real hard to forget," he finally said. "And I think we'd be fools not to listen when one starts shouting at us, even without words." Interview room 3 was small and bare, just a table, 4 chairs, and a camera in the corner humming its way through another day. Morales uncuffed Logan and gestured for him to sit. Rusty lay down at his feet without being told, head up, eyes locked on the closed door like it was the most important thing in the world. The storm in the yard had moved inside, but in that quiet moment it settled into a different kind of stillness, less like an ending, more like the breath before someone finally tells the truth. Shop. Night settled over the desert like a heavy blanket, turning the scrub and rock around town into soft, dark shapes. The houses on Cole Jennings's street sat quiet under yellow porch lights, each one pretending life inside was simple. At the end of the block, a couple of unmarked cars idled low, engines ticking, headlights off, but ready. Rusty sat in the back of one of them, behind a wire divider that felt too familiar. The dome light glowed faintly over his red-brown coat as he watched shadows move outside. The air in the car was thick with human scents, coffee, paper, old leather, but under it all, something tugged at him, a thread of memory he'd followed all day. Morales stood by the open rear door, one hand resting lightly on the frame. His other hand held the leash, looped and ready. Beside him, Deputy Emma Clark shifted her weight, glancing from the front door of Cole's house back to Rusty. "You sure about bringing him?" she asked quietly. "He's had enough for one day." Morales didn't answer right away. On the front walk, Assistant DA Olivia Reed spoke with 2 internal affairs investigators, their jackets marked with small, sober lettering. She held a folded sheet in one hand, the warrant, and nodded as they reviewed their plan. The porch light cast a pale circle around them, catching the edge of Olivia's calm, set face. This was work, she knew, but tonight it felt heavier. Rusty's ears twitched as he watched Olivia lift her hand and knock. The sound carried differently at night, hugging the siding, sliding into the dark house. He had been to many places with Emma, crime scenes, parking lots, back alleys, but this felt different. There was no radio chatter, no flashing lights, just quiet and a house that seemed to be holding its breath. The door opened to a woman in a tired T-shirt and jeans, Cole's wife, confusion creasing her brow. Olivia stepped forward, voice low, respectful, explaining the warrant. Rusty couldn't make out the words, but he caught the tone, a mix of firm and sorry, like when Emma had to tell someone the news they never wanted to hear. The woman stepped aside, and the humans went in. Morales clicked the leash onto Rusty's collar and gave it a gentle tug. "Come on, partner," he murmured. Rusty hopped down from the car, joints a little stiff, but purpose clear. The night air wrapped around him, cool and dry, carrying smells from neatly trimmed yards, a grill that had been used hours before, and faintly from the open doorway, the scent he recognized from the yard. Inside, the house was neat in the way of people who didn't have time to make a mess. Family photos lined the hallway, Cole in uniform in more than one of them, smiling a smile Rusty had not seen in the yard. The dog's nose worked steadily as Morales led him past the living room, down toward a door at the back that opened onto the garage. Concrete and oil waited beyond. The garage light flickered on, revealing a workbench, shelves, and a large metal storage cabinet pushed against the wall. Rusty's head came up higher, nostrils flaring. Here, the air was thicker, old gasoline, cold metal, cardboard, and beneath it all a scent that pulled at him like a rope, the same burnt, dirty note that had clung to the small store 8 years ago. His pace quickened. He pulled Morales toward the cabinet, muscles tight, leash stretching between them. Emma watched from the doorway, heart thudding, as Rusty lowered his head to the narrow gap beneath the metal door and inhaled long and deep. A low growl crept up his throat, not loud, but steady, as if confirming something to himself. He pawed once at the concrete, then looked up at Morales with sharp, insistent eyes. Olivia joined them, one eyebrow lifting. "He's got something?" she asked. Morales nodded. "He's not guessing," he said. "He knows." One of the investigators knelt, fingers working the lock on the cabinet. The door creaked. Open. Metal complaining as the stale air inside spilled out, dust motes drifting in the harsh bulb light like tiny ghosts. Inside, on a lower shelf, lay a handgun in a plastic bag, a dark leather jacket folded on top of an old box, and resting near the back, a torn strip of worn nylon with a broken metal ring still attached. Emma's breath caught. She had seen enough dog gear to know a piece of collar when she saw one. Rusty stepped forward, head dipping, nose almost inside the cabinet, his tail stiff as he drew the smells in. The jacket carried the sour echo of fierce sweat and night air. The gun smelled of old oil and something metallic that never really washed away. But it was the nylon that held him. Faint, nearly drowned by time and dust, was his own scent, tangled with Logan's, with fear, with a night of shouting and sirens. Rusty's body went still, then a soft, wounded sound slipped from him, half whine, half memory. Olivia glanced at Emma, then at Morales, reading the answer in all their faces. "Bag everything," she said quietly to the investigators. In the corner of the garage, a small security camera sat dark above the door, lens cloudy with age. "And get me whatever footage they ever pulled from that store's back alley," she added. "If it still exists, I want eyes on who walked out, not just who got dragged away." As they worked, Rusty backed up a step and sat, unprompted, near the open cabinet, eyes still on the shelf where the broken collar had been. He didn't understand warrants or evidence tags. He understood that the same smell that had torn him away from Logan's side 8 years earlier was here, in this house, tied to this man. His tail didn't wag. He simply kept watch while the humans finally started to catch up. When they stepped back out into the night, the air felt cooler, lighter, as if the house itself had let something go. Rusty paused on the driveway, looking up at the sky for a long moment, then glanced back at the door. Morales gave the leash a gentle tug. "You did good," he said quietly. Rusty moved forward, not proudly, not relieved, just steady, carrying with him the simple, stubborn truth his nose refused to forget. Dawn crept into Redstone thin and gray, turning the concrete yard into a wash of cold color. In the K9 run behind the admin wing, Rusty lay curled on his blanket, head on his paws, eyes half open. He hadn't really slept. Every creak and distant door had pulled his ears up, asking the same question his body already knew. Where is he, and what are they doing to him now? Emma sat on an upturned bucket outside the chain link, a paper cup of coffee cooling in her hands. Her uniform jacket hung loose around her, shoulders sagging from the night. She watched Rusty more than the sunrise, taking her cue from him. When he shifted, when he stared toward the main building, she felt the worry in her own chest sharpen. Inside a cramped office, Olivia stood over a cluttered desk, phone pressed tight to her ear. On the screen in front of her, grainy footage from an old alley camera replayed on a loop. A tall figure in a dark jacket leaving the store's back door just minutes before sirens flashed. Beside the keyboard lay the bagged gun, the stained leather, and that torn piece of collar like a missing word in a sentence finally finished. Rusty could not see the evidence boards or the flurry of calls to judges, but he felt the tremor of it in the building. People moved faster, voices clipped, air charged. Every so often, a door slammed a little harder than necessary. Each time, Rusty's head came up, eyes fixed on the direction of the sound, as if he could will someone to walk through and tell him it was over. No one did. Down the hall from the execution chamber, Logan sat in a narrow holding room, shackles light but present. Father Ben occupied the chair opposite, Bible resting on his knees, though he hadn't opened it much. Their words came in small pieces, drifting and quiet. Logan's thoughts kept slipping past the walls, landing on a red-brown shape somewhere outside, wondering if Rusty was afraid or if dogs understood anything about clocks. When officers came to move Logan, Rusty stirred as if something invisible had brushed his fur the wrong way. He rose stiffly, shook once, then stood facing the direction of the death wing. The chain link rattled as he stepped closer, nose high, pulling in air that smelled of steel and disinfectant, and the faint edge of something final building at the far end of the corridor. Emma watched him, a knot tightening in her throat. An escort team walked past on the path beyond the fence, their boots landing in a slow, heavy pattern. Rusty tracked them with his eyes, body leaning forward. "He knows," she whispered, more to herself than anyone. "He doesn't know what, but he knows it's bad." The dog's tail hung still, neither tucked nor wagging, just heavy. In the execution anteroom, Morales stood near the wall phone, the receiver hanging quiet for now. He looked through the small window into the chamber, then back at the hallway where Logan would appear. 8 years of routine had taught him how this morning was supposed to go. Rusty's reaction the day before, and the evidence since, had blown a hole straight through that script. Back in the office, Olivia listened as a judge on the other end weighed the pieces out loud. Camera footage, weapon match, timeline, the K-9 unit's history with both men. She glanced once at a framed picture on the wall of long-retired wardens, then at the clock. Every minute she stood there arguing was a minute a man in a different hallway thought he was walking toward his last door. Her voice stayed even, but her hand shook slightly on the pen. Rusty began to pace the length of the run, nails clicking on the concrete. He'd walk to one end, pause, nose pressed through the fence toward the main wing, then turn back. The sky was brighter. Now, but for him, the day had narrowed to scents and sounds from a single part of the prison. Emma rose and walked beside him, outside the fence, keeping company in a track only he truly understood. When the escort team finally led Logan down the last hallway, the building seemed to hold its breath. The soft jangle of chains, the murmur of quiet instructions, the low voice of Father Ben offering one final prayer. All of it seeped into the bones of the prison. Even from the K-9 run, Rusty felt the shift. He stopped pacing and stood absolutely still, head turned toward where the sound was thickest. Morales watched Logan place his hand briefly on the cool frame of the chamber door, a small human pause before a machine tried to finish what a bad trial had started. He glanced at the silent wall phone, willing it to ring. Nothing. A tech inside nodded, fingers hovering over switches. Somewhere between two heartbeats, the space between choices narrowed to almost nothing at all. Then, at the edge of that silence, the phone jangled, loud and sharp, cutting through the room like a thrown stone. Everyone froze. Morales snatched the receiver up, the words, "This is Officer Morales," tumbling out on a breath he hadn't known he'd been holding. In the K9 run, at that exact moment, Rusty's ears shot up. He whipped his head toward the building and gave one single sharp bark, as if he'd heard something break in the air and knew, without understanding how, that the story was not finished yet. The ringing phone cut through the chamber like a blade, and everything stopped in place. Tex froze. Father Ben bowed his head, and Logan stood there between the door and the gurney, caught halfway to the end. Morales pressed the receiver to his ear, listened hard, then turned to the room, voice tight but clear. "Stand down," he said. "Judge just signed a stay. They're reopening the case." Word moved through Redstone faster than any siren. In the K9 run, Rusty shifted as the building's tension changed direction. The sharp metallic fear that had been pouring from the death wing thinned, replaced by a jittery, disbelieving rush. He didn't understand stays or judges, but his ears caught the difference in footsteps. Less final, more hurried, like people who just remembered they might be wrong. Emma reached the run a few minutes later, keys clinking, eyes bright and tired all at once. She opened the gate, and Rusty stepped out without hesitation, falling into step beside her. "Come on, partner," she murmured. "They want you inside." His nails clicked on the hallway floor as they walked, the air cooler here, smelling of paper, ink, and something new. Hope, thin but present. In interview room 3, Logan sat unshackled at the table, wrists bare for the first time that day. Morales leaned against the wall, arms crossed, while Olivia laid out photos and reports. When Emma entered with Rusty, the dog walked straight to Logan first, giving his hand one firm, grounding nudge before settling at his feet. Then his gaze slid back to the door, waiting for the other man who smelled like old smoke and lies. The days that followed blurred into motions and hearings, but weeks later the courthouse had a different feel. Rusty rode in the back of Emma's cruiser, watching the brick building loom up, flags snapping in the breeze. Inside, the halls were full of soft-soled shoes and whispers, the air laced with perfume, coffee, and nerves. This wasn't a prison, but people were just as scared here, only in nicer clothes. In the courtroom, Rusty sat beside Emma near the front row, his leash wrapped loosely in her hand. On one side of the room, Logan wore a plain shirt instead of a jumpsuit, still thin, but standing a little straighter. On the other, at the defense table, Cole Jennings stared ahead, jaw clenched, a deputy at his shoulder. When Rusty's eyes found Cole, that old growl trembled in his chest, quiet but unmistakable. Olivia moved through her case with the steady rhythm of someone who had learned the cost of getting it wrong. She showed the jury the gun from the cabinet, the jacket, the photos of the broken collar fragment. She played the alley camera footage, grainy but clear enough to show a man in a familiar jacket slipping out the back door before sirens lit the street. Each piece landed, building a picture Rusty's nose had known from the first. When Emma testified about Rusty's training, his past with both men, and his reaction in the yard, the dog lay at her feet, head up, ears twitching at the sound of his own name. He wasn't a trick dog to perform on cue. He was a living reminder that some memories don't fade just because the ink on a file does. The jurors stole glances at him, at his steady eyes, at the way he watched Cole without blinking. The verdict, when it came, did not arrive with shouting or drama. The foreman stood, read the words "guilty" for Cole and "fully exonerated" for Logan, and the room seemed to tilt. Logan's shoulders dropped, a breath leaving him that felt 8 years long. Rusty, catching the swell of relief from Emma, from Morales in the back row, gave a single sharp bark, not loud, but enough to turn every head his way for a heartbeat. Paperwork still had to be signed, forms stamped, doors opened, but one bright morning the front gate of Redstone finally swung out instead of shut. On the outside gravel, Emma waited with Rusty, leash in hand, Morales beside her with his hat tucked under his arm. The sun was high, warm on concrete, and for once the big metal doors didn't look like the edge of the world, just the end of a bad road. Logan stepped out in state-issued jeans and a donated shirt, blinking against the open sky. He saw Rusty first. The dog stood still only a second, tail quivering, then surged forward as Emma let the leash go. This time, there was no one else to run past, no one Rusty needed to confront. He barreled straight into Logan, almost knocking him off his feet, joy shaking through every old muscle. They stayed there a long moment, man and dog in the dust just beyond the gate, the prison shrinking behind them with each breath. Morales cleared his throat, pretending there was something in his eye, while Emma smiled, palm resting on the empty leash. Father Ben, who'd come out to see what a miracle looked like on a Tuesday, simply nodded to himself. "Guess your last request wasn't the last thing after all," he said softly. Later, as Emma drove them away from Redstone, Rusty rode in the back seat again, but this time Logan sat in the front, his elbow propped on the window, one hand stretched back to rest on the dog's head. The desert slid by, scrub, rock, a long ribbon of road, leading back toward a life that would have to be rebuilt from almost nothing. Rusty sighed, eyes closing, finally letting real sleep tug at him. His person was here. That was enough. For all the reports and rulings and headlines that would follow, none of them could quite capture the simple truth of it. When everyone else trusted paper, a dog trusted his nose and refused to rewrite what he remembered. In the end, it wasn't a clever argument or a dramatic confession that broke the case open. It was a K9 who would not walk past the real killer and would not let the man he loved die for another's crime. If this story touched you even a little, drop a simple comment below. Even just a 0 or 1, so I know you're still here with us. Your little note means more than you think, and if you want more true heart stories like this, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be right here, ready with the next one.